Hey, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons. And we're going to talk about how Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is now very directly, in my humble opinion, telling every 5th edition Dungeon Master, go get books from every single edition. You will convert them on the fly, literally between games and during play. Right now, D&D 5e now owns every single piece of published content from D&D 1e, D&D 2e, D&D 3e, and D&D 4e. And you, as a Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition Dungeon Master, are now directed. I believe that each source book in 5th edition is telling every Dungeon Master your content for running the game includes books from 1e, 2e, 3e, 4e, in addition to your Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition collection. And Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is calling, Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is calling every Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition Dungeon Master to pick up old versions of the game, books from old versions, and convert content from them on the fly between each session and literally during the session. Bold claim, I'll give you my evidence, all right? And then you can make your decision. All right, so this is why this is my opinion, okay? All right, so first of all, I've been watching this for a while in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. There was a question, is Greyhawk in 5th edition? Yes, it's definitely in 5th edition. It comes from Ghosts of Saltmarsh. I thought for a long time that Greyhawk was not in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition because there was no Greyhawk source book, right? Now, this is not the case with Eberron. They're like, Eberron is in 5th edition. Here's your Eberron book. Here's the setting book. There it is, right? Ravnica is in there. Ravenloft is in there. It has 2 source books, right? However, Greyhawk does not have a source book, right? Ghosts of Saltmarsh is simply a book about literally one smuggler town, right? It doesn't talk about Greyhawk completely. It only talks about Greyhawk very, very partially, right? But Greyhawk is established there, right? Now, what's also been happening, though, is increasingly, we saw this in Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. We saw this in Wild Beyond the Witchlight, right? Wild Beyond the Witchlight is literally calling in content from the cartoon. Dragons of Stormwreck Isle is literally pulling in content from the cartoon, right? From the Dungeons & Dragons cartoon. But Treasury of Dragons talked about Dark Sun directly. It talked about other realms directly, mentioning them and pulling them into 5th edition, right? Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel. Radiant Citadel, that book, right? It says flat out, hey, here's Sigil, the Fraternity of Orders, right? And it says specifically that the Council of Whisperers deals directly with Sigil, Fraternity of Order, right? Sigil for Planescape is nowhere in 5th edition, right? So the only way to run that is to literally go buy the Planescape box, right? And then and here's the kicker, right? You're like, well, does that mean I got to spend a year or 2 years converting it? No, because nowhere in 5th edition does it say, hey, spend a year or 2 years to convert this to 5th edition, right? But it says you need to put Sigil, Fraternity of Order, a very specific element from books we have never published for 5e into the game, right? You're like, what? Right? And so what they're saying, and this is a huge request. It's a huge, and frankly, it's more than a request. It's direct demand, right? Like, it's right there in the text. Read chapter 1 on D&D Beyond. Your mind will be blown. It is incredible what that, I can't believe everything that Radiant Citadel has already established. It's incredible, right? But this has been happening book after book after book. They're like, hey, go look at this thing we have not published in any way in this edition. And so why and how is it there? Why is it there? Well, it's very clear, okay? Everyone who loves Gary Gygax is on 5e, right? And everyone who wants to keep Gary Gygax's memory small is on the older editions only, right? So Wizards of the Coast understands that everybody playing 5e is holding up Gary Gygax's memory his legacy with them, right? And they're saying, go get it. His legacy is not 1E. It is not 2E. It is not 3E. It is not 4E. And it is not 5E. Gary's legacy is Dungeons and Dragons forever. Every version played at once, right? Exactly like he did it between 1974 and 1986, while he carried the D&D legacy himself in his own hands. In 1986, he said, Lorraine Williams, carry it the rest of the way. He handpicked her and said, the day of male leadership in TSR is done, right? Now, I established TSR as the greatest, most progressive, most inclusive tabletop role-playing game company that's ever existed. And I established that Dungeons & Dragons is for progressiveness and inclusivity forever. Right? That's what he did, right? And so the designers on 5e are like, look what was happening then. They were playing OD&D, they were playing BX, they were playing BECME, they were mixing it all together, and they were getting content from those materials, right? Now, Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition today, right? Gary's legacy holders, the designer of Dungeons & Dragons 5th, the designers of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition are saying, we honor and we celebrate and we embrace Gary Gygax by saying, go get everything. But they only say this to 5th edition players and dungeon masters, right? And the reason why is they know that Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition dungeon masters are by far the only dungeon masters capable of this, right? OSR and Legacy Edition players, Legacy Edition dungeon masters and players are stuck. And the 5e designers know that the lesser dungeon masters are over on all the older versions, and the lesser game masters are over on OSR. They're stuck in an amber of nostalgia. They're weak, they're slow, and they are not capable of even updating their language, let alone their ability to run the game. But they know, but the designers of 5th edition know that the dungeon masters of 5th edition are up on culture, up on language, and up on every version of the game, right? And are unlike the OSR game masters and unlike the legacy dungeon masters, are capable of running everything Gary created, which is 1E, 2E, 3E, 4E, and 5E, and will be 6E through 99E. As long as Dungeons & Dragons is said, Gary is celebrated. And the only people not celebrating Gary today is the OSR and Legacy Dungeon Masters. And in my humble opinion, 5th edition understands this. They understand that Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition are the only people today capable of celebrating Gary, right? And are the only ones capable of doing this incredibly difficult task, running over 40 books of 5th edition, and then going back and picking out the primest, most exciting books from 1E, 2E, 3E, 4E, and on the fly converting it, putting it into the game, and playing D&D forever. Gary's Dungeons & Dragons. That's my opinion. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.